For center number 3, you should be watching the screencast that's below center number 3, and you're going to be working on narrative writing strategies, looking at vivid verbs when writing dialogue and how to punctuate dialogue. So, you should have already done step 1. You're going to open your interactive notebook to the narrative writing strategies, which we put on page 31. And we glued 2 of these to the very bottom of the page, if you remember. What I would like for you to do, as I'm explaining this right now, is get a highlighter, and let's recap some of these rules. So the first one we're going to look at is just in dialogue. Let's start with said is dead. Said is a really boring verb that we could easily replace with a more vivid verb. And by doing this, you can show sometimes the speaker's feelings and actions as opposed with just one simple switch of a word. So one of the activities that you're going to do at this center is look at different ways that you can say said. And we're going to let it rest in peace and not use it anymore. Some other words just to watch out for when we're talking about vivid verbs, and I just noticed these in some of your past essays: had, made, walk, and run. We can think of lots of better ways to describe those actions with more descriptive verbs. The other one that you're going to focus on, since we're talking about dialogue and said, is when to use dialogue when we're writing. And my first rule when using dialogue, when you're writing a story, is that it must have a purpose in your story. It's not just like, hey, Billy said, hey, he replied, what's up? I asked. Nothing, he said. That kind of dialogue doesn't really add a lot of description or action to your story. So make sure that when you are writing, and we are going to be starting writing some journals for your Middle Ages journals and social studies very soon, you're going to have to include dialogue, but just watch how you're using dialogue and make sure it's purposeful. The next thing to keep in mind is that whenever you use punctuation, it has to stay inside the quotation mark. So I want you to get a highlighter right now and highlight here. You can see that pi ends with a period, that this period is inside of the quotation mark. I'm going to highlight it in yellow and then go highlight my quotation mark in green. Anywhere that I use quotation marks and I have a punctuation mark with it, you can see that the punctuation mark's inside. Here's another example. If I put it a comma, maybe it's not a period. If I'm using a comma, the comma goes inside the quotation marks. The quotation marks show what the speaker is saying. Billy declared she likes pie. I put that inside of quotation marks. It's a complete sentence, and it's at the end of the sentence, so I put a period. Here I switch it around. Maybe I want to start with my dialogue. We call this a dialogue tag, explained Billy. If it's at the end, my sentence doesn't technically end until here. So I'm going to use a comma, and it goes inside the quotation mark. Here I have what's called a split quote. I start my sentence, but it doesn't end until way over here. So here's my ending punctuation mark. It needs to be inside of the quotation mark. And here, this isn't quite, my sentence isn't she. My sentence is she likes pie. But because it's interrupted in this way, and this is just a more descriptive way of writing, I can split it into 2 different parts. So I want you to get a highlighter and highlight how this is highlighted so you can really see the difference in where your punctuation mark needs to go. The other thing you're going to need to keep in mind is capitalization. Billy declared she likes pie. Technically, the sentence begins here, but the dialogue is a complete sentence as well. So when you have dialogue like that, you also need to make sure that you're highlighting or that you're capitalizing the beginning of that sentence. Here, she wants pies at the beginning of the sentence. This isn't the beginning of the sentence because it's a continuation. So this part, if I put my dialogue at the beginning, the second part doesn't need capitalized. Here, my beginning of my sentence is way over here. She likes pie. It's interrupted. This is not part of my sentence. And then This is not the beginning of the sentence because it started way over here, so this is a lowercase letter. So you're going to want to keep this page open while you do the next activity because this is a lot of information, a lot of pinpointing and specific punctuation marks. Something to note, when we think about a character's thoughts, when a character is thinking, the text will appear in italics. So you'll see an example here. Mrs. Culleton thought. She's not saying it out loud, but as a reader, I know that when I see italics like this, that means that it's a character's thought. So what you're going to do now with your group, I have a couple copies of Chicken Little, it's a picture book, with a couple people in your group. Read the story together. And on this handout, it's green at your center. It's in a green bin. Maybe on one side, I think on my example, I labeled, kind of broke it in two. So Chicken Little, oops, that's not what I wanted to do. Chicken Little's on this side. And then over here, after you read Chicken Little and jot down any of the words that you find in place of said, you're going to look at your novel, your Middle Ages novel, and go through and flip through and look for quotation marks. And in place of said, what are some different words that the author used? So the words that you find from Chicken Little, you're going to do in red. And then any words that you add, you're going to add in gray or black or in pencil. After you've done that, you're going to flip it over. And in a little cup at your center, there's a set of little squares of comics. You're going to pick one, and it needs to be different. There are 12 different versions of this comic. It needs to be different from everyone else at your table, so everyone should be doing something different. And you can look at my example. It's in one of the plastic cards at the table, and you can see how I rewrote the comic strip. Instead of using said, I picked one of these words that I found here, or I could make some more up, or if I'm not sure, I could go look up and Google some more ways to say said. And I'm going to rewrite the comic strip using, over here, using punctuation marks for dialogue. And this is where you might need to go back and refer to your interactive notebook. One thing to make note is each time you write a new speaker, you need to indent it. So I'm not going to start at the margin. My very first one's going to be indented. When I switch to a new speaker, it's indented automatically. Okay, and so you should have an exchange of either 3 to 4, maybe even 5 different dialogue exchanges, and that's how many different paragraphs you're going to have. So the best way to look at this is look at my example, look back at your notes, and do your best. If you have any questions, raise your hand.